I can see Aisha here. We'll wait for Sid to join. I think Sid is here. Amazing. Sid, can you hear us?
Yep, sorry I'm late. Just finding the Zoom thing.
No problem. Welcome to round 3 of Intertext Novice WSDC. I am chair for this round. My name is Martin. Panelists, could you please introduce yourself? Oh, sorry. I actually thought the panelist was Intertext Education, like the panelist is using that account. Looks like my panelist is not here. Let me text. Give me a sec. Panelists in room 1 missing. I think their name is it's okay. I can't start them. Okay, I'm going to start without them. Oh, sure. So it looks like I'll be the only person on panel for today's round. And I'll keep a timer on my side. Please keep a timer on your side. I want to be able to put timestamps in the chat. Also, before your speech, let us know how you take POIs, whether through voice or through chat. It looks like Gav wants all their POIs verbally, so we note that. And if you also want to share your preferred gender pronoun, you are free to share that. But if the person does not share it, please use gender neutral. You can just refer to them by their speaking order. Let's have a wonderful debate. Prime Minister, motion reads, one last look at the motion. Motion reads, this House believes the rise of social media platforms focusing on short-form content has done more harm than good. Ready when you are. Prime Minister.
Can I check that I'm visible and, more importantly, audible at this volume?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry, give me 1 second to get my phone.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I got my timer. Sorry for the delay. My pronouns are he, him, verbal, POIs, so just unmute and deliver. What is Thanos' favorite social media platform? Snapchat. We think that the reality of the situation in modern social media is that you don't need Thanos to be equally as destructive on the lives of youth, on the ability to access correct, accurate information, and the ability to access critical thinking and nuanced analysis of deep political issues. Because of this destructiveness that short-form content has had on society, we are so very proud to propose. I'd like to, before I begin my substantive content, deal with a bit of background characterization. And I want to frame the functions of social media in 4 ways. First, that it provides entertainment. So these are, of course, your YouTube or your TikTok that are videos that provide entertainment without any serious academic value. The second is to provide news. The third is to provide biased political content, so opinion articles, etc. And the fourth is as a platform for social advocacy. We think that all of these functions are very distinct, and we're going to show why on all these functions, short-form content actually harms youth's ability to critically address any of these issues. Let's talk a bit about how social media functions in the real world, right? And we want to characterize it like this, that traditional forms of social media, such as YouTube in the early days, largely focus on the long-form content. The reason for this is because initially, social media was viewed as a convenient way to access traditional forms of media online, aka YouTube serving as a means of publishing videos that you could share about news, about opinion pieces, where these were very convenient ways for the individual to access it through the personal devices. We think there has been a shift. Historically, with the rise of things like TikTok, with the things like Instagram or Facebook, allowing for creators to create very short form content, 30-second, 1-minute videos, we think there has been a shift from social media as an arbiter of objective information to social media being used as a means of expressing personal opinion. This looks like political commentators using social media to make personal arguments, or even politicians using social media as a way to personally connect with voters. We think that therefore, this new generation of social media, like things like TikTok, has been so successful because it's driven by a human desire for instant gratification. We think that the source of this desire for instant gratification is a heavily biological thing, right? It exists because of evolutionary pressure from humans long ago to be concerned about things like surviving or getting food on a day-to-day basis. What has changed, however, is that human endeavors in the modern world has shifted up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, meaning that things like self-gratification, self-actualization that we look to in the real world have benefits that materialize in a much longer term. This is the reason why the biological nature of humans' want for instant gratification is no longer applicable in the real world. We are going to therefore extend this later on into an argument of how this lowers kids' attention spans and why this is so bad. But before that, I will also want to focus on one final aspect of characterization, which is how the short form content actually get focused on social media. We think that there are two primary methods. One, that social media platforms like Instagram actually having algorithms that actively recommend you short form reels to watch on your For You page, etc. Or two, platforms, more traditional social media platforms like YouTube, creating these shorts functions to actually be able to compete with the newer generation of like TikTok in order to draw in viewers who like to view this kind of short form content. The yardstick, therefore, is which side better account for the future needs of youth and does this in a way that addresses the fundamental functions of social media. The burden of proof is therefore on-site opposition to show us why the benefits are unique from long-form traditional media and why our harms are not exclusive to short-form content. But getting on to some of the substantive material, we have two arguments. I forward two arguments in my first speak. One, that it lowers the attention spans of youth in the modern world. And two, that it discourages actually nuanced and in-depth discussions on very complex issues. My third speaker will talk about how this further devalues the value of traditional media in the sense that it produces objective information. Go.
At the point in which video games exist, at the point in which Netflix exists, do you not believe that individuals' concentration span will be affected either way?
Entertainment, forms of entertainment are perfectly fine. The problem we have in today's world is when the idea of entertainment being short form, quick releases of dopamine are just not appropriate when applied to something that is supposed to have an objective discussion of very serious topics. Let us keep the short form content to video games and let's keep the in-depth analysis to political issues. Social media merges the two and in so doing discourages the both from actually happening effectively. Therefore, first alternative, lowers attention spans. We think that fundamentally the causal factor in this argument is that short form content, it doesn't have the time to attract users based on high quality content. Therefore, how the short-form content actually attracts users is through flashy taglines, is through impactful, shocking information released in a very short amount of time. We think that the effect of this, the very big problem here, is that then kids growing up in the modern world have become increasingly used to having information fed to them immediately. It's increasingly used to absorbing information within the first 30 seconds of hearing it. The problem of this, the significance of this, is that this is fundamentally incompatible with how our education system works. Fundamentally, where we are trying to inculcate in youth an ability to continually question, we think that the lowered attention span inculcated by social media simply means they're less likely to continue questioning, they're less likely to be continually curious about issues in their education or during the course of this education. And we think this is so especially dangerous when these are the people who are going to grow up leading our world in the future. We think it's especially dangerous that they do not care about actually being critical people and taking in-depth content when they're so focused, used to taking information at its face value. The second argument, a shift away from in-depth and multi-layer information. Three layers. One, there's a lack of nuance in serious issues. We think that the fact that short-form content can only be given in 30 seconds means that necessarily content creators that want to deal with serious political issues can't actually get all the nuances across. I raised the example of people like Charlie Kirk, for example, who oversimplifies complex issues like abortion, like gun violence in America. And I also give you the example of the American presidential debates, which has shifted away from being serious political discussions on television to more fiery spectacle. And the reason they do this is so that later they can post on their social medias so that they attract youth based on fancy taglines, based on phrases that sound good and sound appealing without any real nuanced value to it, without any real nuanced stances being revealed. The second layer is that there's such easily spread misinformation, right? Because short form content is literally designed for sharing. This short form content then, without this nuance, easily mischaracterizes people featured in the content and therefore is source for easily spread misinformation. The final is that it reinforces existing biases because short form content promotes you the content that you probably already like. This simply doesn't encourage the critical thinking that is becoming necessary in the modern world. Because of all these reasons, so proud to propose.
Thank you very much for the speech. We welcome the first speaker for the opposition.
One second, let me just get my timer. Am I clearly, one second,
Yeah, I can hear you.
audible and visible?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, side proposition tells you that content is too oversimplified, that bigger issues are not talked about in depth. But guess what? We'd much rather have you have like some simplified content so it's easier for you to access it in the first place so that you can have like more nuanced discussions in the future. We think like the barrier to entry to get to these discussions and these issues and to like know about them only exists on our side when you're actually able to go ahead and access this content and get like that awareness in the first place on like a base level. We think like long-term content still exists, right? Like you have like long articles, things like that still exist. But we think this is just a medium for you to go ahead and like get an entry, like get awareness on these issues so you can actually go ahead and read more about them later. 3 things in my speech then. Firstly, rebuttal, secondly, stance, and thirdly, 2 arguments within this speech. Firstly, like taking down some of the things that they tell you. They tell you, one, that you're going to have like algorithm manipulation. So like things like echo chambers will exist because you won't have like because you're only going to have like viral videos which are going to be shown again and again. We think that like that's
information
because we think like on our side too, when you have like a lot of content creators now, a lot of people posting these videos, that means that you're going to get like a lot more content. So like these echo chambers are going to be like these echo chambers are going to be like less likely to exist but also because since you have like these new creators coming in, more opinions are still formed. So it's not like you're going to have like the same things propagated again and again. We think more opinions are likely on our side. I'll be explaining this to you through my second argument. But second, they tell you that, you know what, your attention span is going to become a lot lesser because you're going to watch these short form videos. We think that like that it's not only through this short form video creation that your attention span lessens. We think this already happens in the status quo because you have things like video games, because you have like Netflix autoplay, which still exists, because like that makes you binge watch movies. So like attention span still gets reduced on their side of the house too. We don't think this is exclusive, but also it's not like long-term content still does not exist. Like that still exists. So if people want to go ahead and opt into that and like listen to long-term videos, they can still do that on our side. But we think like because, and you usually do that because you have to go deeper, because the way that these short-term videos work is that they give you like one small snippet of it, but it encourages you to go ahead and find out a lot more about it, right? And also just quickly taking down that entire point on misinformation, we think that's exclusive because like misinformation can still be spread through other platforms, whether or not it's like through these short form videos, it can be through articles, things like that. But second, we think cancel culture still exists, right? So like if you go ahead and spread like this misinformation, someone's going to call you out on it. But third, we think like regulations are still in place like within these platforms, so that still exists. Then moving on to my stance, what do we think the short term content is likely to look like? We think this is one
Point of
obviously
information.
short-term videos, not right now, which are like a lot easier to make, so that means a lot more people can access it and make these videos. But second, we think this means like there's a shift away from text and you're able to like move to this form of like videos, which is much more appealing to people because you use things like visual imagery and you use like giant text. But also three, we think these are like dynamic short form videos, and fourth, that everyone can go ahead and create these videos, which means you're able to get a lot more accessibility. But like fifth, what do we think like the most likely demographic who's going to go ahead and watch these short form videos are going to be like young people on these platforms and platforms like Instagram and Twitter. Two arguments then. One, on how you're able to get rapid mobilization of support, but second, on how you get less media saturation. On the first argument on how you get rapid mobilization of support for like social justice movements, we think right now in the status quo, the problem is that a lot of the youth goes ahead and gets locked out from information and does not engage in proper discourse. This is because a lot of these young people just do not have like the same, three things. One, they just don't have the same amount of time to like go ahead and read an article for 2 hours. But second, it's just simply because you live in like such a capitalistic world that everyone's within this rat race, so they can't just like go ahead and like dedicate that much time.
Point
But
of
three, we
information.
think that like reading is just not that impactful because of the fact that it's just like text all over the page. We don't think that even if you go ahead and read it, it's going to make that much of an impact on these people. But usually they just don't use like huge news platforms. They're much more likely just to like go on platforms like social media, so it's a lot more accessible for them to like go ahead and read the like get awareness on this piece of news and then engage in discourse based on that. But on their side, what you uniquely do is go ahead and lock out these people from like viewing these videos. That means they don't actually get awareness on these huge issues because they simply cannot like spend so many hours reading about it. So the harms of this are that one, you just don't get proper discourse on their side, but second, you just have lesser spread of information, and three, you just have lesser stories being shared because only when you have articles, that means those articles come from only like the top writers, right? Like only on some platforms which can be politically biased. We think on our side, when you reduce this barrier, everyone's able to create this content. So that means you have more victim story sharing. That's when a lot more people like are able to spread their opinions. You get the likelihood of discourse is so much more on our side. So on our side, when you have this, a lot more people scroll through these videos a lot more. One, that means you're able to get that baseline information. Once you get that baseline information, you're able to go ahead and use that for later. Like you're able to like search it up
Point of
after
information.
the headline on a page. But second, you're able to get a lot more information passed because like on their side, sure, you go ahead and spend like 2 hours reading an article, but on our side, if you watch 5 videos, you can watch 5 videos on 5 different issues. That means like the amount of content that you take in, like the amount of issues you're able to be more aware about is a lot more on our side because you don't spend 2 hours just reading one article about one thing. But second, we think you're just able to get like, because we've told you that you don't only get like the top stories, but you also get stories from people who have been victimized, right? Like people who have victim stories to share, those stories come out. But third, we think that because the impact that these videos have is like a lot more, because you see like actual visual imagery, that's when you're much more likely to act. That's when you think these issues are actually a big deal, because on their side, you're much more likely just to
Point
read
of
headings.
information.
As I've told you already from like the beginning that you just don't have the same amount of time, so you're likely to just read the headings. When you read just the headings, that means you're not actually able to like get the same amount of impact. You don't think about the video for long enough, so you don't actually act upon it. On our side, the likelihood to like mobilize the support then becomes more because you have more viewers, you have more stories, and you're able to get like more impactful viewing. And also it just becomes easier to share because you just have to press the link and you share it, and much more people are likely to watch it because they're not likely to like read an article that you send them. So when more people view and more people are impacted by this video, that's when you're actually able to like
Point of
take
information.
action about it. That's when you have things like the Me Too movement, protected time. Moving on to the second argument then. on how you're able to get like more content generation and how you get less media saturation. We think the problem is that like on their side, when it's only like long-term content that is created, it just takes too much effort to go ahead and create this content in the first place. This means that only a few people go ahead and create this content. These people are likely to be the ones who like want profit from this. So that means that the content that they create is only based on like popular views, because they want to make the most amount of money. They want to go viral because that's their only way of getting like profits. So they're likely to just like focus on popular opinions and not spread any other views. That means you have like more echo chambers on their side. But like on our side, the counterfactual is that like when more people are able to create these videos, because they're short-term videos, it takes you like one button to press and you create those short-term videos. That means that like people who don't just want profit but who actually want to mobilize support and actually want to start to spread information are able to exist. So they're able to go ahead and share their stories, and you have so much more discourse and so many more opinions coming up. When you have these opinions, that's the only way you're actually able to get like policy changes. That's when you get more awareness and you're able to like get a more connected society. We think that exists only on our side because the barrier to entry becomes so much lower. We're able to get this social support, but we're also able to make change within the status quo.
Thank you very much for that speech. We welcome the second speaker for the proposition.
Hi, can I check that I'm both visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, thank you. Sorry, give me a second to set up my timer. Okay. Side opposition would have the common man on the street understand historic and systemic oppression of the blacks in America based on, and I quote, around 5 short videos on Instagram. This is the paradigm that we fight so hard to defend against. Side with us. Now, firstly, I'd like to point out that they can't claim our benefits in terms of having long-term content, right? Short-term and long-term content is mutually exclusive. When a person's attention span deteriorates, long-term content becomes inaccessible and unintelligible to him simply because he lacks the ability to, first of all, pay attention to the entire of the long-form content, and secondly, critically evaluate and critically approach different opinions, different assertions that are made on whatever content that he's viewing. And so ultimately, they are not able to claim our benefits of having long-term content, of having long-term analysis. And they're not able to say that we'll give the common man on the street a basic understanding through their 5 short videos on Instagram and give people who have time a longer understanding through the news. This is why kids nowadays don't read the news. And now on to my rebuttals, and so many of them for their side. Now, firstly, they come up and say that they prefer simplistic content that gives people a basic understanding of issues. 2 tiers of rebuttals to this. Firstly, this is superficial and polarizing. When all you know about an issue is that something or someone is villainized, only opposition and polarization is created. This is arguably comparable to having no knowledge on issues at all. And in fact, I'm going to prove why this is arguably worse. Second tier, all this hostility often results in explosive and aggressive action taken by people who absorb short-term content. This looks like things like riots, this looks like things like violence. And I'll talk a bit more about this later. On to my next rebuttal. Now, they come up and say that it's not like the same views are propagated because there's multiple opinions that are being thrown at kids on social media. Now, first of all, as I brought up my first speaker, algorithms flood social media to perpetuate similar viewpoints on a singular individual. This looks like, for example, if I click into a video that supports, say, MAGA, I'm likely to be flooded by 5 more videos talking about the same thing. And each time I click on that, the algorithm then finds a way to feed me even more videos that re-emphasize this singular thing, trapping me in this sort of bubble of information, and thus exacerbating the situation where youth begin to think that this is actually true. Not just youth, where people begin to think that these things are actually true. And even if there are multiple opinions that are being propagated, these opinions are nothing but, well, opinions without substantiation that proves one is better than another. Ultimately, in the best case scenario, I would say this creates a lot of confusion for people who are absorbing short-term content. And in the worst case, you end up being trapped in this echo bubble, in this echo chain, which then results in this very short-term, very simplistic argument, this short-term, very simplistic opinion being perpetuated within this group of people. Now, they also claim that we reduce attention spans due to movies and video games. Now, as I've also addressed in my first speaker, I'd like to reiterate again, at the end of the day, this still doesn't address the fact that attention span is reduced to social media on your side. In fact, it's so much worse because on your side, you're talking about things that are directly related to how people absorb the news, directly related to how people absorb information. Whereas on our side, we're talking about things that people do for, say, recreation. We implore that you stop confusing these two rounds. And we also mentioned this situation will not be made much better as well because there are many who prefer social media content to movies and video games, right? We look at the amount of people who are actively absorbing social media content on a daily basis, and in fact for many hours in a day, compared to the people who say watch movies, who have access to Netflix, which might I add in the example, comes with a subscription charge, which not everyone might be able to afford, and video games, which in addition isn't something that a lot of people have access to, right? And on to their first substantive. Now, they mentioned that they allow for social movements to gain more traction and popularity. Now, the thing is, on the first tier of my rebuttal for this support is ultimately misinformed and superficial. It looks like hyper-focusing things on things like the Black Square, the token of the BLM movement, by neglecting systemic and historic oppression that is the root cause which needs to be resolved, right? Second tier, this promotes an attitude of hostility again and aggression towards perceived aggressors. Now, in the real life, this looks like things like hostility towards law enforcement from the Black community, resulting in distrust and aggression, which hinders the efforts to remedy and punish acts of police brutality. And now, on their second substantive about there being less content creators, yes, theoretically that results in a diversity of views, but the very design, again, of algorithms always means that one is funneled into an echo chamber no matter what. This brings me on to my substantive on how they harm youth and future generations. Now, a bit of setup for this. Short-term content is often highly opinion-based. This looks like celebrities and online personas asserting beneficial arguments and opinions that work on their favor, right? And this is often based on, well, not much. This is often based on assertions. This is often based on, again, short-term content because there isn't a lot of argumentative material you can convey in a 30-second Instagram short. Now, youth, however, believe consent through multiple avenues, through multiple forms of corroboration. The first kind of corroboration is corroboration with research or evidence. This is the kind of corroboration that long-form content offers. Stuff like your newspaper analyses, stuff like your YouTube essay analyses, stuff like that. Provides research, provides evidence, provides corroboration, which then is used to then prove a point. This is something that we would prefer. Now, the other kind of corroboration is via herd mentality or by hearing similar things from multiple sources. Now, this is the kind of corroboration that we see very commonly used on social media, right? Where you get sucked into where youth get sucked into an echo chamber and where they continually hear similar opinions coming from what seems like various sources, right? This was like different content creators or different sources of information just reiterating the same arguments, reiterating the same assertions over and over again. Now, given mankind's need for instant gratification, which was again mentioned by my first speaker, and the relative time, right, that it takes for people to find elaboration and evidence, or the relative time that it takes to read a rather lengthy article, right? Youth especially are much more likely to revert to the latter, right? That being corroboration via herd mentality. Now, social media uses very aggressive algorithms to feed youth similar short-form content instead of surrounding the same standpoint. Now, instead of providing elaboration on social issues and concerns, youth are then placed in this environment that's flooded by various sources of short-form content, which then creates a placebo effect of sorts that this opinion is true or realistic. Youth especially are much less able to identify such biases that lack evidence and elaboration, right? If you see things like adults being able to storm Capitol Hill based on a bunch of Instagram content, then what more are youth? Right. Over time, this results in the ability to process information critically, deteriorating significantly due to inclination to take information at face value. Now, what does this look like? What is the outcome of this? Youth then come to devaluate the complexity of issues in favor of short-term and simplistic viewpoints. This looks like opinions like the elections were rigged in the states on issues like accusations of election fraud. Now, long-term content or more in-depth content that becomes hugely devalued in a society that values short, simplistic arguments, short, simplistic problems with short, simplistic solutions, right? This becomes so much harder for youth who then come to lead the world to identify biases and ultimately results in a society that is far less information literate. For all these reasons and more, never been prouder.
Thank you very much for that speech. We welcome the second speaker for the opposition.
Yep. Thank you, panel. I hope I'm clearly audible and visible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. POS verbally, anytime during my speech. If I don't reply, that means I'll take them later. Please don't badger me like you did my first speaker. Apart from that, everything else is cool. I will begin in, sorry, let me just set up my timer. Okay. I'll begin in the reverse count of 3, 2, 1. Panel's side proposition in this debate uses God knows what all theorems to prove their arguments, the validity of which I'm not going to question. What I do question is why side proposition believe that cognitive abilities cease to exist on our side of the house. This biased, one-sided opinion is what you receive on side proposition, whereas in side opposition, you get both sides of the debate and multiple other opinions. I think firstly then, the first clash then in this debate was in context to focus and attention versus information and the right to speech. I think that we on side opposition give you benefits on both comparatively, at least a wash in one and benefits in one. Firstly, then in context to focus and attention. I think that side proposition talks about how human needs have evolved and changed. In panel, we inherently believe that in today's world, entertainment has become a need of the people. In context to focus and attention, side props, the first prop comes up here and talks about how attention spans are reduced on our side of the house. Panel, we inherently believe that on either side of the house, the attention span of children would be limited. Throughout history, the attention span of children has been extremely low. It's part of human nature. I think at the point in which short form content would not exist, as a child, I'd get dopamine spikes in context to like video games.
Points of information.
Call of Duty, for example, where you eliminate your enemies, it might look like objectives, leaderboards, and rewards in games. And so we inherently believe that this short-term focus or these short-term attention spans would exist on either side of the house. It could also look like, fast-paced action movies in the status quo. The world has changed and we live in a world today where consumerism exists either way and will manifest either way. Hence, we think that focus and attention is a wash in this context. Moreover, though, we inherently believe that short-form content is beneficial for studies. At the point in which I, as a child, have worked hard, I've studied all day, at the point in which I'm mentally tired, my ability to learn new things and absorb information decreases a lot. Short-term content helps me relax my brain. It leads to a scenario where I don't have to focus on anything specifically, and hence I relax afterwards, and afterwards I'm able to study better. We inherently believe that the parents are actors that would restrict consumerism of short-form content or media as a whole on both sides of the house. Hence, this is the exclusive benefit on our side of the house in context to how individuals are able to relieve themselves of stress and hence focus better afterwards. Panel, throughout their speech, side proposition talks about how one's brain evolves and grows and how it has different needs and different wants. We inherently believe that a child's brain in the status quo would now adapt information in very short periods of time. And this is applicable in all scenarios because of short form content. We inherently believe that what would happen is because of these children having a great amount of exposure to short form content, their brain develops in a way where they now adapt to absorb information much faster. They're able to absorb a lot of information in a small period of time, and hence we inherently believe that's a big benefit in today's world, and it's a huge advantage in terms of competition to other individuals. We inherently believe this not only helps them with their jobs, for example, it helps them with studies because of how today's education system is based around memorizing. It helps them in context to exploring as a whole, and it helps them develop much more, and that's another exclusive benefit on our side of the house. It is how the brain works. In fact, panel, I wrote a research paper on how the human brains adapt in context to children developing new habits, and this is something that is hundreds of years old. It's not anything new. It was covered in John Locke's essay concerning human understanding. If side proposition wants to quote research papers and theories, let's do the same. For thirdly, then we inherently believe that short-term media
information.
No, thank you. I'll ask you for that. We inherently believe that short-term media is a relative concept. At the point in which I'm not scrolling on Instagram, I don't only read headlines on news. I scroll through headings on Reddit. I might browse through Facebook. I might go on YouTube. Either way, we inherently believe what happens is that you get exposure to a lot of content the validity of which is not proven on either side of the house. Hence, we inherently believe this whole argument on misinformation and how children now become extremely studious and only read newspapers is not true. Panel, we're not living in the 18th century. We're living right now in 2024, and we inherently believe that technology is widely available to most individuals, and hence we inherently believe that individuals will access and use this technology in different manners, and we inherently believe at the point in which short-term content does not exist, individuals will go on things like Reddit, they'll go on things like Facebook, they'll go on YouTube, and sure, they might read newspapers, sure, they might see the news, but we inherently believe that
Points
exists
of information.
because actors like parents exist on our side of the house. My mom, my dad would tell me, hey, go read the newspaper, go watch the news. You can't be on Instagram the whole day. And hence we inherently believe that moderation exists on our side of the house. And the same absorption of content exists inside proposition. And this short-term attention span, this short-term focus exists on either side of the house. But on our side of the house, we tell you why, firstly, individuals now develop and the brain works in a manner where they're able to absorb a lot more information in short periods of time, which is very beneficial for them. And secondly, we inherently believe that it's a big stress buster on our side of the house. Thirdly, then we fail to understand why long-form content does not exist.
Points of information.
No, thank you. I'll ask you for it. Please don't badger me. That's extremely disrespectful. But I think we fail to understand why long-form content does not exist on our side of the house. In fact, we believe that the quality of long-form content on our side of the house is much higher. On side proposition, I consume all types of long form content because I want to explore everything. Whereas on our side of the house, on side opposition, I as an individual have already explored a lot of new topics on short form content. And hence I know my passion, I know my interest. And at the point in which I'm dedicating a lot of time on long-term content, I'm able to choose long form content that I enjoy more, that I'm more passionate about, that I like more, that is more relevant to me. And hence the quality of long form content absorbed is much better on our side of the house. I think on side proposition, then what happens is I as an individual will just browse through headings and titles on the newspaper. I think the short-term attention span of an individual, as spoken about multiple times by side proposition, leads to a scenario where I'll just read headings, where on Facebook, I'll just read the title. On YouTube, I'll see like 10 minutes or a 30-minute video. And hence these connotations of half-baked information exist on my head on side proposition. Thirdly, then fifth, then I think that side proposition talks about the Black Lives Movement.
Points of information.
No, thank you. And how on social media, the information you're getting is horribly bad. We don't understand why the information is bad. We don't understand why it's bad for me as a child to learn about the Black Lives Movement on social media. I don't get why it's bad if I learn about the Black Lives Movement in a 60-second clip. Sure, the amount of information I might be getting, sure, the opinion in context of the information I might be getting is one-sided, but we inherently believe that as I scroll more, I get more information on this content. Thirdly, then, I think that side proposition talks about algorithms and how it locks you into these content and how you don't get to choose the type of content you're watching. We inherently believe that algorithms exist on either side of the house. The platform you're consuming content on is symmetric on either side of the house. Hence, algorithms will develop on YouTube, they can develop on Facebook, they can develop on Reddit. Newspapers, for example, have a specific information like Al Jazeera is extremely biased against the United States. CNN is biased towards the United States. Algorithms exist in all ways or forms. Then what do we give you in side proposition in terms of the new argument I'm bringing in this speech? The new argument, which is the second clash, is this lowers the gap between rich and poor and in context to accessibility. I think the engagement level between the rich and poor is extremely low in the status quo because, rich or middle class individuals go to private schools, for example, whereas financially handicapped individuals go to public schools, for example. And the engagement between these groups is extremely low, and it leads to a situation where poor individuals are locked out, and more than locked out, they're not able to self-actualize because they feel that, hey, there's something wrong with us, we're not part of society, we're not getting what these people are getting. We inherently believe that on our side of the house, in short form content, anyone can create this content, anyone can consume this content, whereas in long form content, only influential individuals are able to get into long form content like Netflix shows, for example. I don't think that if I'm on YouTube, I'll consume a long-term content made by an unknown producer. Hence, we inherently believe that the poor are locked out of opposition and there's less engagement with this. I'd like to rest my case. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that speech. That side, please, if a speaker says they'll take you later, they'll most likely take you later, constantly badgering their speech and being loud and active up here. It's not a nice thing to do, and it could constitute an equity violation. Please stop doing that. You most likely can put the POI in the chat. We welcome the third speaker for government.
Excuse me, Chair. Quick question.
Yes.
I'm very certain that I was looking at the timer and I was POIing on average about like 20 to 30 seconds, which is in alignment with the briefing. So do I take it that you would like us to wait even longer? Is that what you're saying?
No, the speaker said they will take you when it's time for them to take you. So constantly POing within a 20 to 20 seconds still distracts the speech. The speaker never said they are not going to take you at all. He just said they will take you when it's time. So I think that's understandable and allow for that space. When it's getting closer to POI, like period being over, then you can POI. Make sense?
Okay, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Third speaker for Gav, ready when you are.
Hi, sorry about that. Can I check if I am clearly visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Right. Again, just to clear things up one more time, I think opposition seems to be strawmanning our stance and our argument because we've been very consistent in our first and our second speakers. Our side will still have short form content. Our side is not saying that we will completely destroy short form content, destroy it from the face of the earth. But what we are saying is short form content serves a very different role, and this role doesn't belong on social media anymore. Here's what we are actually saying. We are saying we are completely fine with short form content and media for entertainment purposes, which we've told you has historically been a function of social media. We've said that right at the start, in first and also in second. So for example, like what they say, video games or films, things like that, harmless fun, where people just want to switch off after a long day of work, where they're tired and they don't want to think. We are completely fine with this kind of short form content. But the problem comes when social media has evolved far beyond entertainment and into an avenue of advocacy, like what they said, like the entire premise of their case and their substantives. When it comes to serious societal issues, this is the key because the scale and severity of the impact is much bigger and it manifests in real harms and on people's lives. This is an evolving trend that will grow more and more, especially among youth who will be leading our vote in the future. We say that this is when short form content has become problematic, and this is why we believe it has done far more harm than good. Which leads me on to the first clash in today's debate. By far the most important clash because both sides have spent basically the entire cases on this, which side allows for more informed awareness. While I would just point this out right from the start that opposition seems to have lacked the ability to clash with our logic directly throughout their speakers. So their entire premise is that they want short form content because they are able to get more engagement and they are somehow correlating any sort of engagement with awareness. We agree with them that their site may often get more views, that short form content is a lot more captivating to the eyeballs, let's put it that way, than a long form newspaper or an article or a movie or a film. But we say it's extremely problematic because not only is it far more superficial, but it ends up being actively harmful and dangerous. Now, I would just like to point out that short form and long form content often ends up being exclusive. For example, where it's literally on two separate pages. On YouTube, there's a special shorts page, and this is often managed by completely different teams by these social media giants, completely different goals, completely different objectives, completely different teams. Now, you have a surface level understanding on their side, which is often designed to be sensationalized and misleading. You internalize it, and what happens in the real world is then you scroll and it's like a cat video next. And this is not just a random example. This is a serious point because this is the constant engagement where all sorts of different topics and videos are constantly bombarding viewers with all sorts of different things, and it's too sensory overwhelming for them. That is the design of social media. So I'll just give them an example. In the past, American presidential debates used to be hours long with detailed opening statements and rebuttals where presidential candidates had to elaborate on their points with full detail and nuance. And ever since these debates have been televised, and furthermore, once we've had the existence of social media and short form content like reels and shorts where these debates are being clipped and broadcast on, you can see how steadily this has gone down. Now our presidential debate introductions are like 7-minute speeches with 30 seconds rebuttals to whatever in the world the candidate wants to explain. And this is emblematic of the issue here, because now the purpose is not just to provide a nuanced, full explanation. If they wanted that, they would have gone into a lot more detailed explanation of their policy positions, for example. Instead, what the other clips that we see trending on their side, I'll take you in a moment, we see the most emotionally charged, the most sensationalist, the most even divisive content where you have huge, blatant, or sometimes blatantly wrong or blatantly inflammatory statements. Yes, on your side, you get more views, but these are the views that you are getting. I'll take you now.
Yes, considering that short form content was never meant to be educational, considering that misinformation exists on either side of the house, why do you focus on it so much?
Right, so let me get this straight. So you want short form content for important advocacy work for political purposes, yet short form content was never designed to be educational. Sounds about right to you? Do you think that the state of our I think it's a very sad situation you have on your side, where your political systems and the electorate's understanding of important serious societal issues are used by an avenue that is in no way, like what you say, designed to be educational. Thank you very much for that point. So, in fact, fantastic. It segues me into my example. On Twitter, now X, you literally have 280 characters. When Democrats and Republicans clash on their policy positions, they physically cannot explain the other side is wrong because of these reasons, and they give evidence on that. They literally can't do that. They can only say what they're doing right now. The Democrats are letting millions of illegals in the country who are now eating the dogs and the cats. And boom, you hit your character limit. There's literally nothing else you can do. It's practically impossible to have a rational, nuanced discussion. And in fact, I want to flip that point. Everything that they say one more time when they talk about, rapid mobilization of support on their side. Because yes, again, I agree. People are going to be exposed to a lot of content. They're flooded with content. They are overwhelmed. Why do you think they are now able to have a rapid mobilization of support? Because this information and this media is now so inflammatory, so divisive, and so superficial that people are unable to have a come to a rational understanding of it themselves. That is why they're operating on these superficial assumptions and generalizations. That's why on their side, you have the rapid mobilization of support. And this is what the support looks like on their side. We can take the example of the Rohingya genocide, driven in large part by short Facebook posts, YouTube accounts run by military factions and radical monks, because the Burmese population have for months been so flooded by content, short form content in particular, by these factions that they have formed an echo chamber that is impossible for them to discern truth from fake, where they are constantly bombarded by this information, and when they are constantly being emotionally manipulated, when this issue is being constantly overgeneralized. That's when these military factions are able to just say, oh, the Rohingya people, they want to carve out the Rakhine state to create their Rohingya country. They want to tear this part away from Myanmar. And that's when people believe that. This is why, for example, in the Capitol Hill riots, the Jan 6 investigations found that it was driven in large part by misinformation spread on social media like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now, a very quick point about attention spans. When we brought that out and tied that to our point, the only response was that we have video games and Netflix, so it doesn't show that attention spans are lower. Come on, more and more people are choosing social media over video games and Netflix, and even your video game matches are now 5 minutes long. Netflix has to break down their shows into 30-minute episodes because they know viewer engagement drops drastically the moment they even have an hour-long episode. These are the systemic reasons we give you, and this is why this motion must and will stand.
Thank you very much for that speech. Thank you very much for that speech. We welcome the third speaker for the opposition.
All right, cool. Am I clearly audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, 30 seconds to organize my notes. In the meantime, my POI preference is via chat, please. And don't badger on chat either. And my pronouns are she, her. And I'll be starting on my first word. At the point at which Prop's idea of entertainment is a 3-hour documentary on the Yugoslav wars, which the average person doesn't have the time to watch, we don't think that this is a prop ballot at all, right? We think this is a very clear op ballot. If the US elections are full of memes, this is inexclusive because one, some semblance of social media does exist on their side of the house. So you just have a 30-minute video called hashtag 10 funny moments in the US 2024 elections. Or you'd have local talk about how funny they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats is. We don't understand the delta here, right? On the top of my speech, we don't understand why short-form content necessarily is romanticized in the status quo and why there's a hate of long-form content. We get no engagement on this. We don't think that this is the social narrative that exists. Okay, firstly, the major clash is obviously news. And secondly, I'm also going to deal with a little bit of social justice, but mostly everything in news, right? Okay, let's talk about the characterization differences here. Let's deal with gratification first. We think self-gratification exists on either side because regardless of whether you have short-form content and platforms, you're still going to post pictures of yourself, hoping for likes and comments. This is not even a delta in the debate. Let's talk about mechanism feasibility then. Firstly, note that today's youth receives news from many, many more sources than older people, right? You have online videos, blogs, online social networks, mobile devices, RSS, word of mouth, and I can keep going on for this entire next 7 minutes, right? But the thing is that they have trouble keeping up with all of these news stories that were too long or too in-depth, right? What this meant is that they have a lower attention span, and this doesn't have anything to do with short-form content. They also are agitated and distracted much, much more, right? What happens as a result of this? As a result of this, people don't engage with news in the first place, right? Why is this solved on our side? Because when you have bite-sized content, people feel like it's much more digestible when it's an under 90-second video. What this means is that people are actually far more likely to actually engage with diverse perspectives because there are different kinds of media that they can consume. We'll deal with echo chambers later on, and then news in the first place because otherwise they just simply do not read any sort of article, right? On misinformation, then, we think their side actually has more
points of information.
I said chat POS, please. Their side actually has more misinformation because we live in a society where there's a glorification of hard work and where there's an increase in the amount of remote work post-COVID, right? What this means is that people simply do not have the time to look through a 900-word essay. We tell you that bite-sized journalism is good because people are actively able to engage with more news from different places, more on echo chambers later. Even if you want long-form content like serious political analysis, you still have it in the status quo, right? I think I read foreign affairs, I read economists, and it's not like I'm not consuming long-form content, but then I also have Instagram downloaded on my phone. I also have X downloaded on my phone. I don't understand this entire point, and we'll deal with education later, right? Let's talk about lower attention span now. We think modern life already has a plethora of distractions, right? You have notifications, you have emails, you have normal social media that isn't a delta in this debate, and then you have streaming services, right? This constant stimulation as a whole can lead to a decrease in attention span if you want to talk science. But then the ease of access to information also leads to a decrease in the attention span of the normal people because you're more focused on just scanning headlines and saying, okay, I read the news, right? But we tell you, at least on our side, they're actively able to engage with news, which is digestible, right? How are youth affected? Okay, firstly, we do think that a lot of youth do still get good academic recognition despite them having Instagram or X. We don't think that it's as bad as they push, and things like video games and stuff still exists on either side, so we don't understand the exclusivity of this. And if they're as addicted as they push in first, then they completely lose any semblance of actual attention span, even without short-form content, because they just shift to other forms of social media, right? They don't actually study at all, so we don't think that this is very important. We don't get any answer from them on how there's buy-in into this in the first place, right? Why won't people engage with long-form content on our side? The only thing they say is attention span that me and my second have done enough. Okay, let's talk about echo chambers then. But before that, let me take a quick POI. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, considering that there's none, let's talk about echo chambers. Firstly, note that echo chambers aren't unique to social media, right? They exist offline in social circles, communities, and traditional media. So even if you were to talk about Rohingya, this is completely inexclusive. B, let's talk about cross-cultural understanding. Uniquely on social media, sure, even if you like a MAGA post, that doesn't mean that you can't see a post of a victim of the Russia-Ukraine wars asking for money on Instagram, right? We don't think that political biases and like actual cultural engagement are like the same. But then see, even if we were to talk about like sensational views, we think that this still exists on either side, insofar as you always have radical factions, you always have radical political parties on either side, and sensational views can exist even if it's textual content, right? And note that we tell you that entertainment leads to education as a byproduct. So even in a worst case, you still get a net good, right? Notice how the counterfactual of theirs changes from first to third, where first they say we're against all sorts of short form content and entertainment included, because somehow people lose attention spans. And third, they're like, oh, you know what, short form content of like entertainment is completely good. Let's talk about the second clash then on social justice movement. What do they say, right? Even if you have things like the black square, you're not actually changing the root cause. You're not actually like getting any solvency, and you're not actually like changing the root problem here. And before I move on, I'll just take your POI.
The slogan "Get Brexit Done" left many voters expecting a quick and easy results of Brexit in the UK, only to be faced with a much more complicated and drawn-out process of post-Brexit. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, guys. So let's just say the New York Times says that, okay, Brexit was going to be easy. That's not short-form content. That's long-form content. But does that mean voters are not going to buy into it? We don't understand this, right? Because all of the harms that they give you, panel, are largely inexclusive, and they're problems that exist with social media as a whole. Otherwise, they're problems that exist with news as a whole. And this is inexclusive in this debate, because even if like the British people heard that, you know what, Brexit is going to be easy, it's going to happen like this. Number one, most people do have critical thinking, and they do realize how hard it is going to be for pulling away from the EU. But even if they don't do that, right, we do still think that local newspapers are going to glorify Brexit if that's the narrative that was sold to them, right? We don't understand the exclusivity of this. Okay, second clash then on social justice movements. They tell you that the root issues aren't solved. Okay, cool. But we tell you that social justice movements need two types of participants. Firstly, active participants who are the activists themselves. They're like, as the name says, active participants in protests, in strikes, etc., etc. But we tell you that there's another type of participant that social justice movements need, and these are passive buy-in. These are passive participants who also lead to passive buy-in, right? That is to say, only with social media do you have some amount of passive buy-in, and we tell you that this attention is very important, because attention is a prerequisite to social change, right? Because it brings awareness to important issues that can spur people to further look into it and further research what might happen down the road. And secondly, it also contributes to that social movement ability to court buy-in, and we tell you buy-in is extremely important to actually gain any sort of like structural change in society, because only then can you pressure governments to increase the legislation on a certain thing. Like this looks like how in India they released the Nirbhaya laws, which meant that, you know, after the entire social justice feminist movement that happened here, right? So we don't think that this is a huge delta. We actually think that this is one of the issues that we win on, which means that we win the debate, because this is the most important issue, because we're able to have solvency in our case alone. That's why we're so proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We welcome the opposition reply.
Yep, thank you so much. Just setting up my timer. Okay, I'll begin in the reverse count of 3, 2, 1. Panel, let's go point by point over everything that's been covered in this debate. Firstly, in context, like the purpose of short form content as a whole, and in context to focus and attention span. I think that we on side opposition inherently believe that short form content was never meant to be directly educational. Education is the byproduct. Social movements are a byproduct. The inherent purpose of social media or short form content was not such, but even at the point in which it was, I'm not sure as to why misinformation is exclusive to our side of the house. We inherently believe that on either side of the house, people don't have the time to go through content comprehensively and hence scan through facts and side proposition. Even if we take the best case scenario and say, sure, everyone is as obsessed with newspapers as they are, I as an individual will skim over the titles on a newspaper. I as an individual would probably not read the whole newspaper because I physically don't have the time to go through all of it. Secondly, then we inherently believe that in side proposition, you're only exposed to singular opinions or lines of thought. We inherently believe that, as mentioned in my speech and as mentioned in the third speech, that leads to a scenario where I, as an individual, don't come up with my own end impacts. I don't have my own end understanding. This information has been drilled into me. My mind has been drilled to work in a certain way, to have a certain opinion, to have a certain thought process, because I'm taught with these singular opinions. Like if I live in the US and I consume CNN throughout, I'm like, oh, the US is the most benevolent actor in the world. According to education systems in India, the Mughal period and the Mughals were horrible people and I should not know about them at all. I shouldn't care about them at all. And we inherently believe that such biases exist on either side of the house. And then there's the fact that algorithms also exist on either side of the house. Like whether you're consuming YouTube shorts or you're consuming long form videos on YouTube, the YouTube algorithm works the same way on either side of the house. Hence, that's at worst a wash. Thirdly, then in context to attention span. See, even if we take your best case scenario, which we've proven not to be true throughout the previous three speeches in context to how attention span may be larger on your side of the house, we inherently believe that even if we bite the bullet and say, sure, attention span may be larger on your side of the house, productivity in that time period is much lower on your side of the house. We inherently believe that individuals on our side of the house become a lot more efficient. They know how to manage their time better. They're able to do more work in a short period of time. Thirdly, then in context to how there's a much higher gap between classes of society on side proposition, I think that short form content leads to a scenario where I as an individual get exposure to a lot of different branches of society. I might be living here in X part of India, but if short form content wasn't there, I wouldn't know much about another part of India where I might go and study later on, where I might make friends later on, where I might have debate teammates from later on. And yeah, we inherently believe that's exclusive benefit on our side of the house. Fourthly, then in context to political campaigning exists on either side of the house, I think that side proposition puts so much stress on this cherry-picked example of political campaigning. Let's engage in it. I think that since side proposition is so obsessed with newspapers and political campaigning both, let's see what the byproduct of that is. We inherently believe that candidates often buy spaces on the front pages of newspapers, and rather than adding a lot of content on the policies they're creating, the schemes they have, their leaders, what they're trying to represent, candidates often just add a few pictures, add a tagline and say, hey, vote for me. And that's the reality of the world. We inherently believe that's how the world works. In fact, when I asked a POI to GovWhip, they conceded to the fact that the world is working towards reducing requirements of attention spans, and that demonstrates that yes, short-term content is good, the world is adapting to it, and hence individuals can live a good quality lifestyle. Misinformation on short-form content is characterized by the PM in the very first... See, misinformation on short-term content is, non-existent because it's characterized by the PM in the very first minute of their speech. Short form content is not facts, it's full of opinions. We fail to understand how opinions can be perceived as facts, and we think that people understand that social media is opinions, and that, considering the right to speech, we respect opinions on social media platforms. In fact, opinions on social media platforms on short-term content enable call-outs. Panel, we inherently believe there's something known as a comment section, there's something known as reporting false accounts, there's something known as a bio or an account description, and hence we inherently believe that we on side opposition take this debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that speech. Welcome the government's reply.
Could I check that I'm visible and more importantly audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry, let me get my timer. Okay, got it. Okay. when you have 280 words to talk about the nuclear proliferation of nuclear weapons, I think you're less likely to say, nuclear non-proliferation treaty and Fourth Geneva Convention, as compared to, I have a big red button on my desk. Two questions we already answered before we even move on to the clashes. One, why are the harms on site proposition mutually exclusive? We told you about how the normalization of short-form content and the consequent lack of attention span means that even if long-form content exists, that people don't read long-form content as often or don't pay attention to the long-form content. And that's the best case, because most likely long-form content is going to be increasingly redundant, as we see with traditional media sources, as we see with physical newspapers in the modern world. Second question, what's the difference between entertainment and serious issues? We told you that, and we're fine with entertainment being short-form content, because the point of entertainment is to be relaxing. The point of entertainment is to be brainless. But when it comes to serious political issues, these are issues that where in no case individuals can be brainless, right? Because at this point, it's dangerous for democracy, because democracy doesn't mean people are hearing about an issue. The systematic functioning of democracy necessitates informed awareness and calm, nuanced, critical decision-making to produce results that are beneficial for society. This is something that goes as far back as even Plato, right? We would rather voters actually know what they're voting about or what they're voting for, rather than the names of the issues that are in contention during the election. Two questions. One, on which side is information higher quality? And B, on which side do the youth develop important soft skills? On the first clash, the first argument that they give us is that there's a rapid mobilization of support through short-form content. Well, we told you that this is a very bad thing, right? Because the fact that people are joining social movements so quickly means that before they join, that there's no critical thinking involved in making the decision to join. We think that this is so bad, because even if you join a very good political movement, right, you have a very superficial understanding of the aims of this movement. We give you the example of the BLM movement, for example, where celebrities just post black squares on their Instagram account without actually educating the people on the historical reasons and how they can step up to solve the issue of racism in America. We think that on the worst case, right, this might be even worse on their side, because there are bad mobile movements that take advantage of users' shallow understanding and heightened emotions. Things like the Burmese government inciting a genocide on Facebook against the Rohingya people, or Donald Trump inciting a violence on Capitol Hill through his social media posts, through his Twitter. We think that the argument about simplified content is accessible and you can have nuanced discussion in the future also doesn't work, right? Because misinformation, you can't have any sort of discussion if the information shared is just objectively false. The second reason you can't have nuanced discussion in the future is because social media functions to reinforce your biases. When you're used to the confirmation bias, it's very hard to actually be willing to have nuanced, intelligent discussions in the future. The second clash, which side do you use to develop more important social skills? We think that they give us an argument that, short-form movies and video games still shorten attention spans, so consumerism still exists. We told you that entertainment is fine, right? Because it's meant to be relaxing and brainless. But the problem in this debate is when you bring the same brainlessness into serious social political issues. This is something that the social media does, and this is something that we're so concerned about. The next argument they give us about, there's more content generation with short-form content because it's easier to create, so we'll get a larger diversity of views. We told you there are two responses. One, the diversity is so much worse on their side when there are echo chambers on social media because you're pressured into mainstream opinions. And B, the lack of nuance of information on social media undermines your whole point of your diversity of opinions because everybody's now saying the same thing. We think that because of all these reasons, we are so proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. Thank everyone for that amazing debate. And just to confirm, opposition who gave the reply, was it Sid or Aisha? Because
it was Sid, because Aisha had a sudden emergency, so she couldn't stay. So sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much.
Could we ask for your WhatsApp number so our coaches or teachers could contact you after the break announcements tomorrow?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the round. You can cross, and it's a silent round, so you'll get to know our announcements later. All the best. Bye.
Thank you all for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Great, guys.
debate, guys. It was a great debate. Can we get